Hello, everyone, and welcome into the December Roundtable here at the Endgame Syndicate. Your court jester, Davis Mattek, is with you. I'm going to toss some I don't know ball questions to Mr. NerdyTenor, Adam, Brian, and Youdacao. Boys, we are here. It's cold outside, and I'm very glad to be here, picking the brains of you gentlemen. And actually, we have a question that came up on our stream last week that I just wanted Youdacao's thoughts on. We were talking about how Youdacao, your stuff in other people's post-contest sims will often be very far divorced from your results. Like, you'll either look like kind of an average player or maybe a good player but not a great player or whatever. And just how interesting that is in the sense of a lot of people who are using the tools that theoretically would help you win are either not there yet or not even directionally accurate.
Right. And so you just want me to address sort of how that might be?
I want you to address how there can be such a variation in post-contest sims amongst people who theoretically know what they're doing.
Well, sort of how my edge is sort of gained over time is like just observing and slowly implementing those small things and just not really making the same mistake twice. So it might come in the form of some small tweak in construction, or it's just like absorbing something I picked up from the game. And if I'm just gaining a lot of edges that are small, unknown things to the public, it's more conducive to like gaining results that aren't captured in whatever metrics they're trying to go for anyway. So like ball knowing is just like the biggest, most obvious facet of that, in that if you just understand the game, your numbers are a little better. Projections being fed in are different. And if mine is closer to the truth, but it deviates from someone's standard system or like whatever they're inputting, it's not going to look that great. I think that's probably the biggest part.
Yeah.
On the construction side, they're probably much closer to me, or they could even be better in some systems. Because like if I'm not fully engaged into what I need to do every time, which is going to happen a lot of the time because my process isn't automated, I'm not going to be as consistently at my peak, right? I'm only going to be performing my best when I'm totally locked in and I do everything I can because I'm just a person. Whereas they can just take 10 minutes and it's automatically at their best. And I can't get there on most days.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. I've never heard you phrase it that way, but like, yeah, you like kind of like an athlete. Like if you're not locked in, if you're not functioning at peak, if your sleep's not good, your diet's not right, your brain's your synapses aren't firing on 100, then yeah, your results are not going to be, or your post contest results.
Well, my results as it pertains to how I should perform.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It also, I mean, that's a very, very kind answer. There's also, frankly, a couple other reasons why you would see this. The most obvious being that a lot of people's sims just aren't very good. They're not very sophisticated, and they just get a lot of things wrong. And then the second thing is, like, if a significant portion of your edge comes from, having a better understanding of athlete performance, like no ball, then this is exactly what you would expect, right? In fact, you would want your results to appear worse in other people's sims, because that's a sign that you have a different opinion about, what the distribution of outcomes really is. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, personally, I'm trying to like be around 0 in sims when I look up myself, because I want to give some credence to like what they're doing is going to be pretty accurate. And if it's sort of around a similar number across the board, I can trust that I'm in a good spot. But it's like, if I see myself being like a negative 30% or something, I don't really take that as a good sign, because it's probably deviating too far in the wrong direction. And assuming that their thing is at least directionally right, like there's the sim ROI, I'd still want to be near something neutral, but I don't care if I'm, not significantly positive in there.
Right. Yeah.
It's probably good. It's probably a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at one of my sports just for fun. I dialed up from like many months ago, and you are just like barely over the break even in a very simplistic sim that I have. Just
Yeah.
for example, but I mean the real number is going to be higher, right?
Yeah. So to me, that's great.
Yeah.
Because your sim is not going to be terribly off, and it's going to be directionally right.
Yeah.
And if I'm not negative, then I'm probably positive.
Yeah. This is related to stuff we've talked about before. Like if you're coming at this from a sim angle, you should consider whatever number comes out of your sim or a product that you use well, you should consider that number to be a ceiling number, right? Your true EV is going to be below that. And then anybody like sharp in your contest, those numbers should be considered as floors, right? So if I'm running SaberSim, I don't use SaberSim, and I look at my number, that's sort of like the max. And then if I look at, Brian's number, that's a floor. It's going to be higher than whatever that number is. Somewhere in between.
We could talk about that honestly for quite a while about what the Sims numbers would mean for you specifically, Yuda. And Dan mentioned earlier, some people have shitty Sims. We're not saying like SaberSim does or any company does or whatever, but like there are when you make your own Sims, you make bad ones, right? Like it happens. And that's another topic that we could talk about. That's kind of semi-related. Where, if your sim product that you're using or you're making is making, usually how they do it is they make some lineups and then they test them against the fake field. That's kind of like the status quo right now, I think. Well, if it's making, pretty shitty lineups to test, you're kind of better off just using an optimizer and like getting
high projected point
lineups with some variation, and maybe you play around with it like we all used to. And then
I still do every Sunday. I click those buttons.
So
sim, it's great.
It's better than making 1,000 shitty lineups and then testing them against a fake field, for sure. So when Petty does kind of similar to Youdacao, where they make their own stuff, they throw it in an optimizer with a whole bunch of different rules and groups.
Are you referring to Petty as they? That's very woke of you, Brian.
What did I say? They? Whatever.
You said. I just you didn't want to assume his gender.
You just want to have a take cast, don't you? That's what you've been doing all day, trying to get me going. What was I saying? Oh, anyways, and so like when they make their optimizer lineups, they're naturally different already because they have different projections, and then they have all these different rules. Like you kind of like don't even need a sim when you do it that way. Assuming you're one of these two guys, which is a big assumption, you're probably not. But I think there's a lot. So like Dan will do some sims where he'll just have every single lineup possibly created and then test them, right? And you can only do that in a few sports. That's different than what I'm talking about, right? Because like if you could create all the lineups, then you're not going to really have this issue if you have enough time to test them against each other. But I think there's still a lot of merit to the old school process if you're good enough, if you're like ball know-ish enough.
And then like another issue with the Sims from a ball knowing standpoint, because it's not just when we talk about it a lot of times, it's like, oh well, you didn't use their projections, so it's not you're not going to show up that well. There can be like compounding errors too. Like if you think about NBA and you're projecting somebody to play several more minutes than whatever sim you're using, like not only are they going to be assuming a different median projection, they're going to be assuming an entirely different distribution, incorrect standard deviations on the back end and all of that. So like you can, depending on the specific like players too, you can kind of end up in bad spots. So like that's something that I know I'll check if there's a slate where like my post contest stuff isn't as good as normal. I'll look and like see if a lot of my, quote unquote bad lineups were ones where like I had Damian Lillard, who I know I projected for 3 minutes more than everybody and 5 points more than everybody and stuff like that.
Yeah. And you do that, you're gonna look shitty in their sim review, like where you change a major player by 3 minutes or something like that. You can't possibly get high in their ROI. It's really staggering how much projections drive these sim products.
The sim products.
And you could see, Davis, right, when we do the ADP version of Dan's sim on your show. Like
I see it using the solver, which is, I assume, because it's cheap, relatively speaking, the most used public facing one. Like really what it does is it just gives me a lot of high projected lineups. And then if I'm any lineup giving up more than like 6 points from the optimal, no matter kind of what ownership or correlation you're gaining from it, is like guaranteed to be negative sim ROI. Like, and I don't, maybe that's how it works. Like someone, you guys would have to tell me, but it's pretty linear how the projected points work in the solver. Which is not to say it's a bad product, because I like using it, but I wouldn't say it's like the print money button.
You're saying projected points with like value wise too, though, right? Like it has to be a good value player, because it's not just, if you have 20 projected points but the salary's 11,000.
Yes. I'm saying the lineup as a whole. I'm saying like once it's like 6 or 7 points, once I get past that, when I'm trying to work through stuff, I just can't really get it to give me good sim ROI unless I have like 5 players from the same team. Like if I give it Purdy, Guerrero, Kittle, Jennings, and the 49ers defense, then it'll give me super high sim ROI.
This is where post lock sims are nice, because the guessing is now gone. Like where they're guessing, because highly projected, high value players are going to show in every sim. Basically, every sim will be like, "This is a good play. Just play
right."
It. The field's not playing it enough. I mean, I suppose you could adjust the field so high on that player that it becomes a bad play. That's definitely possible. But like that's not what I've seen in most sim products. Is you're going to get those value players over, and you probably should, I would guess. But in the post lock sims, we know the combos finally. Now we know the combos. We know what everyone's done. How much did he actually get played? And then you can at least measure that stuff. It's still super biased. But that does kind of answer, because like at that point, Davis, when you're like, man, I really wanted to play this Mahomes stack or something, but the solver just said no. And then in the post lock sims, even it's like really bad. Then it's like kind of what Yuda was saying. Then it's probably bad, like it doesn't mean it definitely is. But like checking it afterwards, I don't know if you can do that in the solver.
They update.
You kind of faded out there. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, they do. They update it with the Astros.
Oh, they do? Something's wrong with your mic.
Yeah, it just got weird for your mic.
Yes.
You gotta stop streaming porn so much, Davis. It's taking up all
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's
You're
much
good.
better. Yeah.
I don't know. I must have turned away from it. I actually, Brian, I wanted to bring this up because part of the thing with Endgame Syndicate is we kind of want to help people build their own shit instead of just force feeding them. And I was talking with Tuttle today, and if there's someone out there who is a computer programmer and really knows a lot about soccer and likes to watch it, there's a lot of money to be made. Not a lot, a relative amount of money to be made, because there is no sim product for soccer at all.
Mm-hmm.
And Tuttle does the projections for Roto Grinders, and he would be the first one to admit it's a very imperfect process because you're dealing with a lot of partial data. And something that is unique about soccer, it's kind of like basketball, where guys will have different roles based on who their teammates are, and you wouldn't know that if you don't know soccer. So basically, I think there's room for someone to become the Youdacao of soccer on DraftKings. The money is obviously not as good, but it's like they will occasionally do 100K to first, like 2-3 times a year, 20K to first, maybe once a month. A lot of time it's like $5,000-$10,000 first, so it's not like the greatest. But you could like own the lobby, like if you really did work at it, you could be the best in like a matter of months.
It must be really hard because
It is.
There's so many, like, there are so many fans that if this were relatively easy to do, somebody would have done it.
Somebody would have done it.
Because
Yeah.
there's so many eyes on that game. I mean,
There's Ceramac.
Yeah.
So there was, but can't play in the UK anymore.
Right.
Oh shit.
So he's not the guy who was pretty universally the best player.
He's lived in Vegas before. I wonder if he moved back.
Well, maybe I don't know, but
Change the screen name, get a new thing. I mean, but Davis, I think you're kind of right. But like, man, I dabbled in soccer probably like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer. Getting data was kind of hard. Believe it or not, maybe it's easier now to make a model. Was tough. The prop market and stuff was kind of weird. It wasn't like ours. There was a lot of, the plus, over 1, over 3, over 4, over 5 type of stuff. And
I mean, I imagine the gameplay, it would just look like hockey.
It's
like in the scoring.
The correlations were weird, if I remember right. Like, because there's a lot of negative correlation too, because like there's only so many goals. So like if you get the goal, I might not get it.
It's also like there's like game state stuff. So like you might want to play a defender against your forward, which doesn't make intuitive sense. But like because of game state stuff, if you're down 2-0, you're in a game state that incentivizes you to shoot and to cross more instead of hold possession, which you don't get any points for. I mean, it's the DraftKings scoring system could obviously be improved, but they're not going to. They haven't changed it, and they actually once for a year. They made it incredible. They changed it from 9 roster spots to 11, and it was like no one figured it out. It was like insanely and then they changed it back. They changed it back to the quote unquote class. It's like when FanDuel did the drop score, and then they changed it back. But I was really thinking about that after talking to Dan. I was like, if there's an Endgame Syndicate guy who's down to watch Sparta Prague games and know who's who, that is going to be an edge that maybe literally no one else on the world would be wanting to press in gambling.
Interesting.
The start times are weird sometimes.
That is for sure. Yeah.
It's gonna
be like
the
kind of
release
like
of the starting lineups is kind of weird. It's not that bad though. Like some sports are like some sports.
You get it 60 minutes before in every. For but that
like
means you only have an hour to run your
staggered
shit.
start times, so you don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking of reasons.
I was also got me thinking of one of your favorite conversations. Would there be a way to cheat at DFS? And there would be a way to cheat at DFS if MLS was a bigger DFS sport, because MLS they don't release their lineup 60 minutes before. And if you like got in touch with all the social media interns out of the MLS teams and got the lineups before your opponents in a staggered start spot, that would be a very cheap and easy way to cheat. But there's no edge.
Yeah.
Maybe you could get a fish to play you for 10K or something. I don't know. But like if you posted, maybe you'd get one snagged every once in a while.
Yeah, I suppose that's like a lot of work for MLS.
A lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, it's I wouldn't doubt. This is all very old school to me, like
These games must be tough right now. We're talking about building soccer models and MLS.
They are, though.
Yeah.
What about hockey? Adam, don't you like ship hockey every other month or now or something?
I'm not having a good year. I keep finishing like 6th. No, I don't know. Like hockey, in post-sim stuff, hockey seems very similar to baseball, where there's a few people, and obviously it's going to vary by what like sims you're looking at, look like they're pretty good, but like there's just not that many people that look good. Yeah, I still don't really know what to make of hockey. Like, there's obviously so much variance day to day, like there is baseball. Yeah, like it seems really similar to baseball, at least in how things look post contest. Obviously, fields are smaller, prize pools are smaller.
Yeah,
I hated. And a lot of the regs are starting to play. Like that was the thing where, maybe it's always been this way, but I just haven't noticed it. But like, there's a good amount of names that like just play, that you recognize that are in those fields now. Whereas when I used to like occasionally play, it would be like there were hockey regs, but you weren't getting all of the NBA guys playing too. And now there's like a decent amount of the NBA guys in there.
Is that a bad thing?
I mean, so my thinking with why like NHL would be kind of beatable is kind of what you guys were saying about soccer. Like if you just jump in against a bunch of NHL regs, but you're using like all of the advanced DFS stuff that you've built up from other sports, there's a pretty good chance that you're just going to have an advantage in how you play the game, I think. But now you have all these other people that, yeah, they don't know hockey either, but they just play DFS really well, and now you're playing against them.
Yeah. I remember back in the day when people would switch over from No Limit Hold'em PLO, when PLO started getting bigger, they were just donkeys. There was no there was no transfer of knowledge basically from one game to the next. The NHL, I thought it got tough a few years ago, honestly. I stopped playing it.
Yeah, I mean the year I won the tournament, I'm not even convinced I was plus EV on that season. Which is kind of ironic.
I never really played it until I started like last year. Because it was like a running joke because I won the 50K to first during the NBA All-Star break a couple years ago, but like that was the first NHL tournament I played all year and might have been like the only one I played. Last year I played it semi-seriously. This year I've been playing it most nights, but like it seems relatively tough.
One of the provinces, whatever they're called up there, banned
Ontario
DFS, right?
Yeah.
And you think that helps or hurts?
Probably hurts. Probably hurts the EV of the game.
I think overall
it has best players were probably from Canada.
Only if they're concentrated there. I mean, I think overall it just has to be bad, right? Because anytime the prize pool shrinks, like you get less people interested in playing, and then the density of good players starts to go up.
How many good players is worth, what's the trade? Because a good player, it sucks. That sucks. You don't want good players. They cut, what is a good player cut? How many bad players would you be willing to give up?
Yeah, how many spots in a guaranteed prize pool do you trade to get one I don't know, top 25 guy out of the pool?
Yeah.
Well, if he's playing 150 lineups and his ROI, let's say his ROI is 10% and the rake is 15%. So he's getting, so to pay for that, you need 150 lineups that are losing 25% to pay for that guy, right? Because they need to lose the rake and then the 10% to get him to get his 10%, right?
You're forgetting quality of life percentage.
So it's a lot of people because, I mean, the worst DFS players are typically not mass entering. So, like, if you're talking about bodies, it's like a lot of people, right? If you're talking about lineups.
Can you translate it to like how much ROI one person gains when the 10% guy quits?
Right. Let me think about that.
Well, it's probably distributed evenly based on the other ROI.
Yeah, like what that would be.
It's like what he's being replaced by. Like, Yeah, if he's being replaced by a break-even player, then that person is losing to the rake only. So that's like an additional. Like if he's 150 maxing a $10 thing, that's 25% of $1,500. So it's like, $400 back into the pool.
I imagine in the real life case, it was probably he was replaced by smaller fields.
Yeah. And smaller fields are like smaller contests are bad in two ways. You have a higher density of good players, and they're often less top heavy, which is less good for the good players as well, right? So if you're a good player, like you do not want to see contest shrinking. Like that's doubly bad in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a Brian's always complaining about how top heavy it is, but theoretically for you guys, you guys want that. You guys want winner take all contests, basically.
Kinda.
I like it if I'm in first. I hate it if I'm in fifth or later or less.
Yeah. Yep.
I hate it this year. Like I think I'm actually probably this year have played like my best DFS and just like finished in fourth so often.
Sucks.
There's nothing you can do about it.
No.
Pretty much.
Nope.
Brian, do we want to do the humility conversation from the stream today?
Sure. Why don't you start?
So there was this interesting thing that came up in Battle Royale, basically like the interesting thing about the draft-based games is that what the field's doing before the contest locks, so it creates this interesting element of like the ownership to some degree, and then you have to decide how bad that is, and then how much you trust your own projection, and then how much you trust in our case, Dan's sim. So basically, I don't know what would be the right way to ask this as a question, Brian. Like, if you know the field is jamming, I don't know. I can't think of the way to translate this to salary cap DFS. Really, what would be the analog?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think. I think you can't. Yeah, you have to kind of make up a complete new one.
Yeah, it doesn't really translate effectively. It comes down to this actually. It's almost more of like a metaphysical question of at what state do you say that not only is your process the best, but that you are the best at knowing how to identify what a good process is, almost in a way. Like at what point do you say this is complete? My work on the process part of it, not the input, not refreshing it for the new NBA slate, not refreshing it for the new NFL slate, but in saying this is as good as it can get. And actually, if I do anything more, if I add anything more to the process, it's actually going to take away from my results. Maybe that's the way to phrase it.
I'll give an example, I think, of what we talked about earlier with Yuda's idea of looking at post-contest sims of other people's stuff and like trying to get to zero just in case. That's an example, I think, of being humble, because it's really kind of arbitrary, honestly, because like if they know less than you, then you should, like they should be, you should be negative because they're screwing up. So, but saying like that, I want to be at least zero in their sims is being like, well, maybe I don't, maybe there's some alpha there. Maybe I don't know everything every night. So as long as I'm not doing that bad in their sims, that's probably pretty good. I would consider that.
I think assuming you're the best and then going from there is the ideal then, because then it puts more pressure on you improving your process. Because if you're not actually, you don't really have like that to lean on when you're executing. Like if I'm putting it in the most simple way.
Okay. Yeah. But maybe it makes more sense to give the exact situation just to see Maybe you'll say, don't be an idiot and just do what the numbers say. But like, so this is the situation. This week in the draft games, Josh Allen was going first overall. Basically, any kind of math-based anything is going to say it's just bad to take a quarterback in front of all these running backs who are projected for a lot of points. But also, Josh Allen is like, I mean, as we know, one of the few dudes who can like outscore everyone else in the field by 15, 20, or what, including skill position players. And like, let's say this continues until Saturday. So ETR's numbers come out, Sabersim, all the projections are out, and the field keeps hammering it. Is there a point where you say the field's wrong and I'm right, or do you introduce any field-based humility into your process? Basically, is the situation that we were trying to game out.
Okay, probably not. No.
Yeah, that's kind of where we ended too, actually.
I think so. I'm like trying to think it through. I think the difference for me in a case like that, you can just kind of map out the correct the correct strategy for positional scarcity and stuff like that. I'd be more inclined to like kind of err towards the field if it was like an input thing where the field thinks Josh Allen projects for 28 and I think he projects for 19 or something, like where I'm like, okay, maybe I'm like really missing something here in how Josh Allen performs, as opposed to like Josh Allen is a quarterback. You get to roster one quarterback and that's just like a fact and it's not an opinion-based thing. So like I think that would kind of be the difference for me, where if it's like a positional strategy thing, I'm gonna just trust what numbers tell me.
I think that's a good distinction to make. In this specific case, it's definitely the former thing and not the latter thing. Like I used like 3 or 4 projection sources, and they were all pretty close in their opinion of Josh Allen. Close enough where that doesn't explain why everyone is just hammering the crap out of him. It's interesting though. I think one way in this specific example, I would work in a little humility. It would be like, okay, so let's say I accept that picking him first is wrong and it's a mistake. But let's say my stuff says he should be picked 10th. Well, maybe I'll split the difference and say if I can get him 5th, I'll go ahead and grab him 5th. As just like a combination of a little hedge and a little bit of humility about the actual process. Could be wrong in some way.
Yeah. And then you get the added benefit too of just having a more diverse portfolio, but also where you're getting better Josh Allen teams than most of the Josh Allen teams that exist.
Right. Yeah. So I still haven't drafted him. I think I've only done like 8 or 9 drafts, and I have not been able to pick him up yet.
Yeah, well, you said your stuff was saying he was like 11th or something.
10th or 11th, something like that.
10.8 or something. Davis, I said on our stream that I think you had it like backwards, like the humble idea. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's more it's both ways. So like you could be humble in your process, whatever that is, be it a sim or a ball knower with the sims in your head. And you could also be humble and go, well, maybe the field knows. Maybe the field knows more than me. Now, the answer to that question, though, I do think is subjective, really. Well, maybe
I'm not even viewing it like as a humility thing. It just sounds like a risk management question because you already put in the work. You're comfortable in your numbers. You can double check those. At a certain point, you just have to let others pay the rake.
Right.
If they're that far off and not even dabble.
Yeah, and
it sounds like your scenario. That's what it should be because you have them 10th or whatever.
Right. I made a
don't even try to middle it.
Right. Another way to just diversify is to just instead of forcing in something that you think is probably wrong, just play less teams. rather than hedging by getting Josh Allen. It's just like, okay, I'm not going to max this time because that's another way of handling it.
That's good advice too.
Yeah.
And like thinking about it too, it's kind of just like in your head having an idea of like the volatility of your assumptions. Like if I think about like just regular best ball during the offseason, I wasn't getting like a lot of Bijan Robinson or Brees Hall for a while because I had them ranked through like 10th and I was taking all these receivers ahead of them. But realistically, I know that the range of outcomes for all those guys is pretty close, and I should probably at some point just move them up and start taking them, even if it's not going to get me as much as I would have gotten. But like, if the field was just constantly taking Bijan first and I had him ranked 9th, I'm probably just never going to draft Bijan.
Right. No, that's a really important point, and I think it's important to measure or try to measure what the cost is of making the change. So, like in this case, this is a $7 entry, $30,000 to first contest, right? So it's one thing if taking Josh Allen drops your EV by $2, like that's a significant amount. But if taking him first, let's say, but if you measured it and it actually only cost you 15 cents,
right,
then you're starting to get within the range of error of whatever sim product you're using, and you might as well just take them first, right? So yeah, the magnitude of the EV swing is very important. In this case, it was not a small one. It was significant. It was significantly worse in my stuff to take them first. So
I do think it is still subjective and arbitrary a bit, like this kind of idea. There's so many ideas kind of intermingling here. It's hard to kind of really get what I'm getting at here. But like the idea of going like, maybe the field knows, whatever that is, the ownership in DFS or the ADP in best ball, maybe knows more than my process. The idea of like, okay, so therefore I should take Josh Allen sometimes is a risk management decision. I agree. Portfolio, I agree. But like the number of times you do it is arbitrary pretty much. And Dan, you kind of already had the answer earlier on today. Like you could just like flip a coin, or like whatever that percentage should be around, 5%, 10% or something. And then you can't do that with a coin, but you could do it with, random.org, type in 0 to 100. And if it goes 10 or less, you draft Josh Allen. But that number, whatever that number is still pretty random. It should just be something, it should be something. You're saying that because from a risk management perspective, it should be something. Just fucking flip a coin or use some sort of random generator to make it when that happens.
The other thing is you want to consider how many different sources of edge you have. Like we talked about that too, where like it makes sense to diversify the source of your EV. So let's say not taking Josh Allen first is giving you like 10 cents of equity on every $7 draft. Well, then maybe you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket and never draft Josh Allen, right? Especially if there's a lot of different ways that you think you're picking up EV, right? Lots of different construction things and projection edges and all sorts of correlation things. Like maybe just say, okay, I'm just going to grab some of my EV here, and I'm not, again, it's a different way of thinking about the diversification.
I think about it that way in like off-season best ball too, where sure I have my player takes, but I don't think that I'm like significantly better at player takes than a lot of people. But I think my biggest edge is probably just putting together quality teams when I draft them. And so it goes back to like, maybe I have an edge as far as thinking that Justin Jefferson's better than Bijan, but I also think I have an edge in just drafting good teams. So do I really want to just not have any Bijan when I can draft good Bijan teams too? And that's probably where my bigger edge is.
There's probably a number where you could figure out like the top players are going to be drafted in best ball. What is it? 12% of the time or whatever. What's their ownership? Whatever it is, I can't remember. There's probably a number where it's like, well, you probably don't want to be below this in the top 10 or top 12, top first 2 rounds. And so like, then that's your number, like 2%. I should always take 2% of Josh Allen, something like that. Maybe not. Maybe that doesn't make any sense, but you could probably get some sort of heuristic out of this, like for this specific situation. That like it makes me think about DFS actually. Like, let's say running backs 50% owned. Is it ever okay to go zero?
Piece of shitty ass play.
No, I know, but let's say it's not, for the sake of the argument. This is the point of kind of this. It's similar, Davis, to your question of like
there we go. It took us 10 minutes, but we did get to a similar question. So like last weekend, good example would have been, so let's say if we can pretend in an alternate universe, Kenneth Walker plays, so we don't get the Charbonnet $4,800 on DraftKings, and it was Guerrero and then Braylon Allen was right there. They obviously would have increased both of their ownerships, and Braylon was like a much thinner play because of Isaiah Davis, yada yada, whatever. And let's say he projected for Braylon Allen projected for 38% ownership, right? But he was definitely relatively thin. Yuda, as a prime ball knower, you would know that. Would like, to Brian's point, would you be like, well, I still will have 4 Braylon Allen lineups because of humility to the field, or that just doesn't matter at all? There is no humility input in the Youdacao model, or even a theoretical modeling, I guess.
Yeah, I still think it's kind of risk management. Sounds like in that scenario we should be under on Braylon, but doesn't mean you have to. It wouldn't be a binary outcome because there's just the question just becomes how much those entry fees matter to you, right? If you have one team, you're definitely not taking Braylon Allen. If you have a bunch of teams, significant fees, it's just safe practice and right practice to incorporate them in.
Yeah, and I mean, it even goes back to what Dan had just said too about the different edges. Like, if I think that there's 5 different ownership edges to be had on like wide receivers, and I'm playing a bunch of lineups, then I want to be jamming those receivers and still be playing Braylon Allen a decent percentage of the time, because I don't want to. If I have an edge on these receivers, there's no reason for me to then put myself in a position where potentially Braylon Allen runs hot and I don't win just because I decided to play 0 Braylon Allen when I had an edge somewhere else.
Yeah, in this scenario though, we're saying you did your sims, you did your stuff, and it says 0 Braylon Allen. Are you going, fuck, maybe that's not right? Maybe there's
then no.
No.
I'll take 0.
You'll take 0?
Yeah.
I think for me it depends. It depends on like I generally would take 0 too, unless. So there are times where a sim or a solver, when I'm doing a best ball, will give you 100% of one thing and 0 of another, but it's actually very, very close in EV. So the sim is like, this is better, give me this one.
Right.
So if it's a small enough delta, that's a good place where I'm like, you know what? Not just for diversity, which is one thing, but also just the confidence you have. Like there's a point you get to where like the margin of error is sufficiently large. Like on the streams that Brian and Davis and I do, running my battle royale tool. I'm running these live sims, right? And I'm listing off options for what to draft next. I'm basically bundling up everything within 10% of the top option because I know how my sim works and I know that there's enough noise in it that any options within that range are basically indistinguishable from each other. To really distinguish the EV of those would require it to run for like 10 minutes and we have like 15 seconds, right? So, I mean, and this can happen in any kind of skill game where you're trying to maximize EV. You'll see this in poker solvers where like, the choice is call or fold on the river, and you enter the ranges correctly, and it's 100% call and 0% fold, and it's in a 50-100 game, and the difference in equity is 37 cents, right? Because it's just always going to give you the thing it thinks is the best. So just a little caution to not take a 0 too seriously, depending on why it's a 0. Like, is it a 0 because it's really bad, or did it just barely miss the cut? Like those are different things. Even if you're, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sort of on the assumption that if your sim is pretty strong and it actually is telling you to take 0, it's just too big of a delta, right? If it was close enough, any decent sim that has like a management or like incorporating ranges of these ROIs would still give you some element of the worst play.
You could, yeah.
Yeah.
Just like through the randomness and stuff like that.
I'm trying to think of a DFS example that would be like what Dan's talking about here, because it makes so much sense in poker that if
it would be like the last play on a showdown lineup or something that's relatively uncorrelated, but it's like a 1.5 versus a 1 projection.
Right. I think
those inputs are volatile because like the 1.5 just comes from a reception or something.
Yeah.
Another example would be a very small field NBA where you have two options that are within like a point and a half of each other. Like if you sim that out, it might very well give you 100% of the one that's 1 point higher, just because the field is so small. It doesn't care about, diversifying against 6 people or whatever. It's just gonna, because you're already gonna get that by default. That would be, another example. It might be a very small difference in EV potentially.
There's probably scenarios on any given slate where like like the difference between two NBA players is like, let's say 3 points or something, where the sim's always giving you the guy who's got 3 more points, and that's probably right. But there's probably scenarios where it's closer than that and there's just like less options, and maybe your standard deviation it's just not there, where the sim's just going to be more like an optimizer. This is really, you see this in optimizers, but for sure you see this in optimizers where it's like, no, this is 0.1001 points higher than the next lineup, so this is the one that you're getting.
Right. That's why when people use optimizers, need to add randomness or take other measures for exactly that reason, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or export them and then do something with the lamps. It's definitely more in optimizers, but I could definitely see it. I have to think about this because it's a really good point. You wouldn't
end up on 100 versus 0 though, because if you're making like multiple lineups, you could very well just play the same team that's just a 1v1 and then end up taking both in 2 different lineups.
Yeah, maybe we play it out in another toy game video, Brian. See what we can figure out there.
Okay.
Interesting.
But the Braylon Allen thing, by the way, where you just knew the answer, he goes, no, I'm going 0. I think that also means the Josh Allen, you're not taking him. I think to be logically consistent, if your stuff tells you Braylon Allen's no good, I'm not taking him, and then your stuff says Josh Allen sucks, don't take him number 1 overall, then you should also then say I'm not taking Josh Allen.
Yeah, I mean, just personally, I'm content to just freaking jam whatever in the BRs because it's so much smaller than DFS. Like I don't even think about diversifying anything. It's like just because I'm mostly by testing it out.
Here's a follow-up to that. So like, if you think that Josh Allen is clearly a bad pick at 1, are you mixing who you take when you have the first pick, or are you just jamming your consensus, whoever you think number 1 is?
I think you mix.
I think you mix.
Yeah. It depends. I think it depends how different the choices are up there, I would say.
Sure, yeah. If your number 1 is way better than the rest of them, then you just jam number 1. But like, assuming that it's some sort of your number 1 guy projects like a point better than your number 2 guy, whatever. Like, I would be inclined to think that you should be mixing.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we have this week. So it's Barkley and Derrick Henry and Allen are the 1, 2, 3, not in that order.
Well, I'm looking at this game. What's the record number of possessions in an NFL game?
Is it just 1 3 and out after another?
We're at like 16 possessions right now.
Oh my god. Is it still 3-3? It's 3. Oh my god.
We've got
3-3.
12 combined punts. Really incredible stuff.
I gotta captain more punters in Showdown, obviously.
Yeah.
There should be a scoring system for punters in Showdown. There really should.
It is kind of a fun part of the game. Like a really good punt is very satisfying. You know.
With how mad people get about kickers, can you imagine if you started getting like coffin corner points?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's,
there's gotta be a way to do it. You know, I don't know, half a point for a touch. I don't know. I mean, someone smarter than me could game it up. You guys remember the first Showdown slate they ever launched had IDPs, individual defensive players?
really wow.
Did it?
Cool.
Yeah, the very first
Wow.
time it was ever on the site, it had individual defensive players.
They should have kept that in.
Huh. Wow.
There'd be a game with some edge. No one would have that.
Oh my God.
The
Sure.
field would not be ready for that.
Yeah. They should have
Interesting.
kept that in. Would have made it much more complicated. And bring the assistant to the regional director, captain.
I don't know. I think Showdown is a really good product because it seems to like pretty closely nail the sweet spot where it's easy enough for casuals to find it enjoyable, especially when there's an 8 million way dupe that happens often enough that a lot of people can be happy, but there's still a lot of edge because we all know why there's a lot of edge. So
Yeah.
I kind of I think it's one of the better DFS products actually.
That's true. I think you could have left in defensive players though, and normally it would make no difference to the normie.
Uh-huh.
They just sometimes, unless it was his own roster spot, Davis. Was it its own roster spot? I can't.
No, it was.
You could just pick one.
You could just pick one.
Yeah, no, I think I think that would be perfect. That'd be a nice little edge bump, and I don't think the normies would care.
Interesting.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Are you guys ready to take this to the paywall?
Yeah, sure. We're not getting any questions here, anyways.
Yep. Everyone's too busy watching the fucking punt fest. All right, everyone. Check out endgamesyndicate.com if you want more of these in-depth discussions where no one has to be cagey and they can just give you the secret sauce. You head over to endgamesyndicate.com. That is where the secret sauce can be found. We'll be back with you guys next month. Adios.